Okay, so my name is Tanya Yuson. I'm the moderator for this afternoon. Before we start, I'd like to introduce some very special guests who came all the way from the Philippines to Frankfurt and who are only making their appearance for this panel because they're very, very busy. So can I please call up on stage our very special guests? We have Crispin. We have Basilio. We have Alexandra Trece and her kuya Carlos. Wait, don't fall. Don't fall, don't fall. So please take your pictures now because this never happens in real life. Thank you very much. If you don't know, these are the characters from Budjette Tan and Kadyo Baldissimo's Trece, which is available at the Philippine booth downstairs, and it's also a series on Netflix. Thank you, Kat and Seraph. This is Seraph, who played Kuya Carlo. He's Budjette's son, if you want to know. One here, one there. You're not.
I'm on the other side. I will grab you. Okay.
You're here. Have a seat, yes? Okay, now I can introduce this properly. So today is a graphic novel, Philippine graphic novel, Spiritual and Mythical. Today's graphic novels have spiritual energy and a mythical quality to both the story and the art. They explore themes from our epics and local mythology to make new stories and inspire new myth-making. Our speakers for today are Budjette Tan, who supposedly grew up in a haunted house and was told to sleep early because there were aswang monsters outside their bedroom window. Who would have known that these stories would later influence and inspire him to write the comic book Trece, co-created with artist Kadyo Baldissimo. Their comic book is a 3-time winner of Best Graphic Literature of the Year in the Philippine National Book Awards. In 2021, Netflix launched the anime adaptation of Trece and was in their top 10 shows for a whole month. He now works in Denmark as one of the creative leads in the Lego agency. He lives there with his wife and son, and far away from any aswang, or so they think. Our other presenter is Jay Ignacio, who is a musician, actor, documentary filmmaker, improvisational theater veteran, and co-founder of Third World Improv, the premier improv school in the Philippines. He received his bachelor's degree in development studies in 1995 from the University of the Philippines, Manila. His first graphic novel, Alandal, won the 40th National Book Award and 7th National Children's Book Award. His book has a German, Burmese, and World English edition. He also most recently just screened his documentary here in Frankfurt. It's a preview, and it's called Comics with a K. So it's only going to be released in April of next year. Our speakers, and then we're going to start, I think, with Budjette.
Hello. This one works. Hello and good afternoon. Alexandra Trece is a paranormal investigator who uses magic spells to solve crimes. Crimes committed by aswang, which are vampire-like creatures from our folklore, crimes committed by ghosts, and crimes committed by the old gods from the Philippines. Next slide. When casting her spell, Trece usually uses her kris, this dagger with a blade that looks like frozen lightning. Blacksmiths who forge the kris believe that the blade can be infused with a spirit or soul, which makes it stronger, more deadly than other blades. Next slide, please. If Trece needs to interview a dead body, for example, she can use her kris to get some blood from the victim, drop it in a basin of water. She then lights a candle and lets the wax drip into the water. She then calls the victim by name. The candle wax will then take the shape of the victim and will speak for as long as the candle is lit. This is based on the real-life ritual called pagtatawas, which uses alum or white candle wax. This was done in our house when I was a kid to determine what was the entity living in our garden. Our dog used to like playing in the garden. Then one night it just came running back into the house, scared. It didn't want to go out again. It would bark at something in the dark. Then it would run and hide if we opened the door to the garden. So we called for amang tatawas, a shaman who performed the ritual, and the candle wax took the shape of a small man. To be clear, the small man did not stand up and speak to us. If that happened, I would have run away scared like my dog. But based on that shape, the shaman said that there was a duende living in our garden, a dwarf. He communicated somehow with the duende, and the duende gave instructions. The duende told us, the duende was living with a tribe. There was a whole tribe of duende in our garden, supposedly. And they asked for a daily offering of rice and fish. And they said some chocolates would also be nice. They asked for the food to be left at the foot of the tree, which was on the left side of our garden. In return, they said they would protect our house and stop playing pranks on the dog. We had nothing to lose, so we did that, and it actually worked. Or we don't know if the dog was just eating the fish and the rice and the chocolates. That detail of asking for chocolate offerings was something we later included in Trece. So, in the comic book and in the show, whenever Trece needed information from a duende, she would bring them rice wine or chocnut, which is a popular Filipino chocolate bar. And later on, she would give them Kit Kat if she needed a bigger favor from them. Next slide. In one case, Trece confronted the Datu of Baguio, the Lord of Storms and Lightnings. Next slide. He communicated with people through their television sets. He promised to give their village a good and prosperous life, next slide, as long as someone was sacrificed via electrocution in their village. Next slide, please. So even if he was a being from above, Trece simply saw him as a bully running a protection racket and shut down his operations. Next slide. This was partly inspired by religious movements in the Philippines who broadcast their worship programs on TV. In some households, all activity needed to stop when the show came on. And everyone was required to sit in front of the TV, watch and listen to the preacher, who will then do karaoke sing-along of praise songs. Thankfully, they only asked for monetary donations and did not require human sacrifice. Next slide. In an upcoming issue of Trece, Alexandra must team up with her brother, Father Matthias Trece, who uses prayers and holy weapons to exorcise demons. Next slide. Father Matthias has these arnis fighting sticks, next slide, which could then be combined into a holy cross to banish demons. Next. In one moment, he stopped Trece from casting a spell because he said, you don't know who you might be summoning because it's not a holy weapon that she's using. Next slide. But at a certain point, Father Matthias had no choice but to use Trece's dagger to create a new cross. And then armed with a high-pressure water gun, next slide, which was filled with holy water, next slide, they banished that demon. Next slide. At the end of the story, the brother and sister had this discussion. Trece asks, what's the big difference between magic and miracles? You grab a handful of objects, say words of incantation, transform those objects into artifacts of action, and you tap into that energy. Father Matthias says, that's the trick, isn't it? When you ask for help, does the other side expect something in return? Or do they give it generously and unselfishly? Trece asks, do you have proof of that? Next slide. And Father Matthias gives it a think as a dove flies away. And he says, I have faith, Alexandra. I have faith that it's true, and I believe. And Trece just ends the conversation with, I believe we need another round of coffee. And that is where Trece lies, at the crossroads of our world, the underworld and sky world. It's a reflection of how it's normal for the Filipino to have faith in a higher power, embrace ancient folklore beliefs, and cling on to lucky tokens. Thank you very much.
Jay?
My graphic novel, Alandal, is a work of complete fiction, although this was set in some historical circumstances. I chose the 1770s in the Sulu region of the Philippines to tell this story. For a first-time graphic novel writer such as myself, the entire process felt a lot like time travel, or at least I imagined it to be so. In 1995, I learned that one of my maternal ancestors was a princess named Sabina from the Kagan tribe in Davao City. And aside from incomplete and very old, faded documents and photographs, there was very little information about her that was available. At some point, I stopped digging through more information and just moved on, content with the knowledge that there was a princess in my family tree. In 2013, I produced a documentary film called The Bladed Hand, where I explored the origins of the Filipino martial arts. Now, when we talk about the fighting arts, there are very big egos involved, and some of these big egos have very tall tales. And I had to filter all of the fiction to get to the facts. In 2017, I had an idea for a graphic novel that takes place in the 1700s in the Sulu Sea. This was a period in which Filipino martial arts known as eskrima or arnis or kali emerged out of the frequent clashes between the natives of the Sulu Sea and the colonized, Christianized natives of the Visayas region in central Philippines. The idea of combining all the data I gathered from The Bladed Hand with a fictional set of characters excited me. Slide 2, please. History is there to show us the past in order to guide us towards the future. But what exactly is the purpose of historical fiction? What truth or reality can be found in stories that never had really happened? Aside from making things a little more interesting, I believe that its job is to spark curiosity among the readers to see things from a different perspective, one in which the reader is more involved and not just an observer. It is meant to stimulate conversation. We can go on a tour visiting heroes and legends, the origin stories, the struggles of our people. We can go through an entire list of who, what, when, where, and how. But the most important question, in my opinion, is the why. Why is Lapu-Lapu a hero? Why is Ferdinand Magellan the villain? Why did they do what they did? Was it as simple as Magellan telling my ancestors, hey, I discovered you? And Lapu-Lapu saying, diese Roma sind verrückt. Sorry, I had to pull something out of Asterix. These Romans are crazy. Or was there something more political and sinister behind all that? The story of those two famous figures ends with Magellan's death in the Battle of Mactan. It is probably the most fictionalized and over-romanticized story in our grade school history books, designed to instill a sense of patriotism with dramatic flair. A lot of Filipinos use the Lapu-Lapu story as a way to reconnect with their ancestry. It is through him that some find a sense of identity. Slide 3, please. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. In my case, aside from visiting museums and digging through history books, it was in the graphic novels of old that I found my inspiration. In the 1950s, Filipinos spoke in a certain more elegant manner, which by today's standards would be considered archaic. It is the flavor of language that I attempted to achieve in order to hark back to the days of Francisco V. Coching, when Tagalog comics were profoundly romantic. The golden age of comics as we call them today. Next slide, please. My journey through the past was enriched by actual visits to the southern Philippines into Bangsamoro territory, as well as volumes of books about their history and culture, and also these very old graphic novels. One final element was needed to complete the picture, and this was the unique artistry of somebody who survived the golden age and continues its legacy. Alex Nino is a master illustrator of Philippine and American comics who has a fondness for fantasy, heroes, and swordsmen. He and I met in California in 2013 while working on a documentary film about Filipinos. This was the one Tanya mentioned earlier. Comics with a K is what it's now become. He and I met in California in 2013 while working on Comics with a K about Filipinos in the comic book industry, both in the USA and in the Philippines. During our first interview, I asked him to draw something just so that I could have footage of him at work. With a blank artboard, a fine-tip pen, and 2 brushes, he illustrated a hunter from the Sulu archipelago that later became the inspiration for our graphic novel, Alandal. By the way, during that period, there was a term called the Filipino style of comics, which was distinguished by their mastery of the Chinese brush. Now, for the documentary film Comics with a K, I asked Randy Valiente, who learned from one of the veterans of that golden age, to illustrate a poster for the film. And the brush, he used one brush for this artwork here. And that brush used to be the brush of Alfredo Alcala, one of the renowned artists of our golden age. Next slide, please. Alex and I happen to share a fascination for the sword, a means by which we could romanticize the struggles of our protagonists and create an iconography for our colonial history. Together, we worked on a story that was meant to take the reader on a similar journey as we did, where the past was very much alive, where our people struggled against invaders, where families were broken, where heroes and villains were made, and where we rediscovered ourselves. Connecting with our past through our collaboration in Alandal was, I dare say, a spiritual experience for both of us.
Thank you so much, Jay and Budjette, for showing such beautiful artwork as well, and just talking about the journey for both your graphic novels that share this DNA that's really about discovering the Filipino characteristics and heritage, whether it's historical or within our within our culture. We'll open the floor to questions if anyone wants to start. If not, I do have a question in terms of for like the supernatural. What do you think it is that, when you guys started, there wasn't a lot of that happening. But since then, it feels like people have discovered it. Why do you think there is for like Filipinos who are creating as well, but also, we look for these stories, these lower mythology, it's called, although I don't really like to call it lower mythology, but these are old wives' tales that you hear from grandmothers about why you shouldn't go out at night, or if you come across a tree, a very old tree, you're supposed to say something like tabi tabi po, which means excuse me, I'm coming through, just as a mark of respect. So why do you think it resonates with young people or modern Filipinos to kind of see these stories in a popular form, like a graphic novel?
Yeah, I think it's mainly because, as you said, we've heard these stories, we have been told these stories, but rarely have we read about them, right? There are few books that have cataloged all of these stories or have turned them into entertaining stories. But I think there's just this need, growing up with all of these stories, we just grew up with the need of, let me retell it, right? And let me tell it in my style or in my version or from my point of view. Or in the case of Trece, it's like, these are all of the things I was scared of. I have now created a character who's not scared of them.
Jay?
These supernatural beings that we create into our folklore, our legends, that shape our spirituality, they give us an identity because of, I think, in the same way that crafts do. So we can talk about weaves, or we can talk about weaponry. The way these things are crafted also reflect something distinct. Call it ethnic or whatever you want, but it gives a distinction that belongs to a particular culture. And so it's the same with these legends. There are legends that are specific to certain cultures and religions that make them special in that way, I guess. So we find ourselves in these stories, in these characters, or even these monsters. We relate to them in certain ways because maybe culturally we share something.
Question over here. Can we get the mic to the front for our national artist, Kidlat Tahimik?
Yeah, I was always reading comic books when I was a kid. As a matter of fact, my first connection with Rizal was through comic books, no? Pero siguro, especially this new generation, I think people watch more visuals than reading words. So I think I like your approach that, for example, yeah, we can either bring back our old mythologies, which have been displaced by Spider-Man and Wonder Woman. I mean, kids now know the middle name of Spider-Man and they know the birthday of Wonder Woman. I don't know anything about our local characters. Your Lapu-Lapu, was that yours? Lapu-Lapu? Ay, okay. That, I think this morning during our panel, I don't know if you were there, but I showed a bit of the end of my film about the landing in Mactan. But I think I tried to show that Lapu-Lapu wants to repel the invaders not by going into war and having a bloody ending with a lot of loss of lives, but he starts with using angklongs, bamboo instruments, and making a noise barrage to try to get them. Although in the end, because history says that Magellan died, I ended up with a. But I think, and here maybe I can throw in something that might be interesting. Okay, we can also mix folklore, oral traditions. In the case of the Battle of Mactan, we know about Lapu-Lapu because he was mentioned in the book of Pigafetta. No? So he's forever enshrined in the archives of Sevilla, and it's good. You can research on that. But then, very few people know about the wife of Lapu-Lapu. Have you heard about the wife of Lapu-Lapu?
No,
Has
please
anybody
tell
heard
us.
of Bulakna? Okay, Bulakna is the wife of Lapu-Lapu. And she was a leader. She was a beauty. She was a warrior. And on top of that, she was also a makata, a poet, and a babaylan, a shaman. Wow, what a nice combination. But on top of that, because Arnis is the, you were doing something about Arnis, no?
Yes.
Or your blades. Arnis was the pre-colonial martial arts in Cebu. So I could imagine if you're the first lady of the island, the wife of Lapu-Lapu, you must also be a black belter. So I have that sequence that, and I think I would like to throw it to you. Maybe you can draw a series that Wulakna gives the final blow to Magellan. You see, I made an installation, and Lapu-Lapu is on the side, and then Magellan is already sprawling, and then there's Bulakna making the final Arnis blow. Whack. Sorry, Magellan. You can finish your circumnavigation in the next life, but not in this. So I think we have to keep changing also because, yeah, if we all get caught in the the trending stories of other countries, I think we should go back to our mythologies and that's going to be the strength of your storytelling. Anyway, I'm glad that you find that spiritual, I think that spiritual element is a very important thing in your stories.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much
sir.
for that. How do young people especially come up to you, like, because at various Comic Cons and book fairs, like what reactions surprise you from when they read your books?
Um, I I feel like sometimes it's mission accomplished on my end because they come up to me and ask about these things. Did this really happen? Was this the way things were in the past during that period? And it sparks that conversation where I get to tell them that those were exciting times of maritime competition among the Sulunan natives and the European empires expanding into Southeast Asia and creating all this competition and invasion and resistance. So yeah, I'm glad that they get curious. They ask me these things, and I get to tell them what I created and what really happened.
Yeah, the next usual thing is they then say, I'm telling my own story, right? It's because of the stories that they've read, it inspires them to, oh, I never knew I could tell a story like this. And now they're bringing in their own inspiration, their own personal stories, giving it a twist. In the case of Kat here, who starred as Trece for 5 minutes, what Kat did is take Philippine mythology and give it like a spin that's anime about mecha, and I'm sure that's already attracting the kids who love anime and mecha stories, right? So I think that's the great thing that has inspired past couple of years in Philippine comics of how photocopied comics have just spawned more stories from the next generation.
There's a question in the back.
I want to know about your experience on the culture police in the Philippines, especially those advocating for against cultural appropriation, because most of these spiritual and mythical characters, they come from the knowledge of our ancestors, our indigenous ancestors, and sometimes I feel that those belonging to the culture police, I'm calling them the police because they're flagging down and somehow hindering our abilities as Filipinos to share with each other our creativity and our traditions.
My only experience with the quote unquote culture police was on the one of the first photocopied editions of Trece, I needed her to cast a spell. And I told Kajo, just put in squiggly lines. And then somebody came to us and says, your alibata is all wrong. And then we stopped using squiggly lines. So people stopped complaining. But I think as far as like the myths are concerned, I think at the very least, I think that, again, I joke about it, but I think that's the only time someone has pointed out a mistake that we've made, or actually he was being helpful and said, I know this, I can teach you if you want, I can help you out in your next story. But as much as we can, within the story, within the context of the story, we talk about where did this creature or being come from, right? So we mention, based on what we've read or stories that we've heard, we mention if it's a story that came from the north or from the south. And hopefully that's enough to get the reader more interested to dive into learning more.
In my case, I think it's I've been fortunate enough to not have gotten flack from the gatekeepers, because I think they call you out if they don't know your intention. But somehow I'm able to explain to them before their tempers flare that no, this is my intention. And they just back off and say, okay. So I've been lucky in that regard.
For the spiritual and the mythical, you mentioned a bit about reading for the research. I just want to know, like, how do you conduct your research? Do you find that there's a lot of material? Do you go to unorthodox ways, like, seeing shaman in Quiapo, like, or time travel back to the time of Magellan?
Yeah, for Alandal, the research that I did was I had to hit the books literally. So first it's acquiring these books, and of course that takes resources then. But the other thing I had to do was interview some of my Bangsamoro friends. They're like, hey, I plan to say this. Is this correct?
From the south, basically.
Yeah. And then
the culture that is where Lapu-Lapu should be coming from.
well, Lapu-Lapu's from the central part. My story happens in Sulu.
Yeah.
So I visited Zamboanga, Basilan. When I was writing, I went as far south as that because I was told by policemen not to go farther. But anyway, yeah. So visiting places, visiting the cultures, the Yakan. I visited some Yakan bladesmiths in Basilan. So got to document some of what they were doing. Yeah, for me that was the kind of research that I had to do. And also Alex Nino requested me to hit the museums as well. Especially Ayala Museum, because he said, take pictures of the dioramas. Like, okay.
But not the prehistoric gold, or because they actually have a very big archive.
Yes. I had to focus on the 1700s. So galleons, the ship designs that they had to incorporate into the pages. And also weapon designs. So I had to send him reference material on Toledo sabers and Maranao swords and things of that nature.
Yeah. Do you have a shaman consultant on retainer?
It's my mother. No, for some reason, my mom just attracts these strange things, paranormal events. She gets magnetized to her. So that's my main source for all of these supernatural, paranormal stuff. I hear it from my mom, and then my relatives from Bacolod would also tell me stories. So that was like the primary source in the first batch of stories of Trece. later on, it was the Soul Book by Hilda Cordero Fernando, or published by Hilda Cordero Fernando, as well as the UP books about our myths and legends and folklore.
Oh, sorry, in the back, yes. A microphone, please, for the lady.
But how do you know how to depict these creatures?
How
Is
do
there
you,
history of like drawing them, or you invent it? And do they protest, or
can the creatures protest how they are depicted? Which is a
That-
very important question.
That is a story I've been dying to write one of these days, of like a tikbalang going, I don't look like that. Redraw me.
We encourage them to have agency. None have come forth.
They might just,
What did we open?
The interesting thing is that, again, how they have been described. The funny thing is, it doesn't matter what part of the Philippines you go, the description for an aswang or a tikbalang or a manananggal is the same, right? In some provinces, it just changes a little bit. So it's interesting how all of these these oral reports that eventually got written down just are so consistent that you just can't help but believe maybe it's true, right? But what we've done in our stories, of course, is where there's not enough detail, that's where we fill in the gaps, right? That's where the artist starts to take a bit of artistic liberty and then think, oh, maybe the nuno looks like this, maybe the duende looks like that. Because in general, it's usually like small, old, cranky man. It's like, oh, you're describing my uncle, or like tall, black, scary man. It's like, oh, you're describing my friend. So the general descriptors are the same, and then little details start to change, wherein you have a capre in one province that smokes a cigar, in another province it's an agta and he doesn't smoke, so he's the healthier giant creature. But yeah, it's based on like the things we've read, the stories we've heard, we find the common traits, draw that, and then add on to it.
Yes?
One final question from me. I remember in 2018, Neil Gaiman stating that he's really interested in our mythology, in our creatures. And man, Neil Gaiman has aged really badly for us. But of course, he will always be an influence. And how do you reconcile that, him being an influence or someone that we can look back to, and with all the things happening that has happened or he did, as a creative, showing that it's not an excuse to be, for you to be strange and popular and mythical, for to be a bad human being, to be ethical, not unethical.
So I think it's maybe because, and it's been documented, like how Neil has appreciated that. I guess if I may synthesize a little bit, so is it an issue for you that, with events coming to light where, how his conduct has been versus like his appreciation? Like, can we separate those actions from what we know about him now? Is that correct? Which is a tough question.
Yeah.
I think we all face that question for our heroes that we have. It could be one personal and one another.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, for some weird reason, the two people the two writers that have heavily inspired Trece have, it has come out that they have done misconduct, right? And has had terrible relationships or have been terrible in their relationships. So I mean, so it's kind of hard for me to pick up their books again, right? But definitely I cannot help but acknowledge that their stories were the jump-off point for what we've done today. So
And at that time when you first
yeah,
read them.
definitely at that time, right? So yeah, opened my eyes to like, you can tell a story this way.
Yeah, you know, when that news broke about his misconduct, the first guy I contacted was him. I said, "Hey man, how do you feel about this?" Because we're both enormously influenced by him. And so, yeah, I messaged him right away when that thing broke. And, like, man, how do we process this? But, you know, now, given that some time has passed, um, it's easier now to separate the artist from the art. And there's really no denying that I'm not ashamed to say that I am heavily influenced by his work. I'm not ashamed to say that, regardless of how people think of him, um, because it's an undeniable fact. Now, if you know, I don't think people will cancel us for being inspired by the man's works, but you know, I guess now we have that benefit of time. We can separate his conduct from his creations.
Can I go back because you're speaking of being inspired by work on the visual front for your graphic novel, where you harken back to the romantic of the the golden age of Philippine comics, which is generally considered around the 1950s and 60s. Like, what is, and I have a side note after, but what is it about that era that you find attractive?
Okay, the so-called golden age of Philippine comics was a period in which comics was one of the main forms of entertainment that we had available. Uh,
And it was cheap.
Not everyone had TVs yet, and it was the most widely distributed form of entertainment. You know, people had to go to the movies, whereas with comics, they just had to go to the corner and read off of the corner shop. Um, so in harking back to that period, that was a period in which so many publications were around, hiring so many artists for their own in their own house, and all of these publications churning out titles weekly. And the competition was so stiff among these writers and artists that we produced really some of the finest art ever anywhere in the world with regard to comics. And people spoke and wrote Tagalog. My original intent for Alandal was to publish it in Tagalog. Um, so I wanted that flavor. I even hired a translator to translate my Tagalog into the more archaic kind. Like if you watch the black and white movies of old, they spoke in a certain manner. You know, that was the kind of comic book that I wanted. And especially because it was being illustrated by somebody from the Golden Age. And we were both referring to Francisco Coching. My story in Alandal is a tip of the hat to El Indio and Ang Barbaro of Coching. And Alex Nino wanted always to emulate Coching, who was his idol. So we both agreed that, okay, let's do this comic.
Do you know the connection between the Golden Age Comiqueros and Trece, the series on Netflix? So, yeah, there is a connection.
Really?
Yes. So, a lot of the Golden Age illustrators around that time, it's a little known fact, there are some of them that were hired by Disney to like animate in the US. So they worked on a lot of Disney films, like, doing the day-to-days, doing the animation or the assets, as they're called. Those guys came up in the ranks. They hired young animators like Jay Oliva and Jojo Aguilar, who then Jay is like a Filipino-American who directed a lot of like Batman, like all the Marvel superhero like animated ones directed by a Filipino-American. So in that turn, when, and I worked on the Netflix series, when Netflix was looking for a director for this, the first person they called was Jay. And Jay always says it's the only time he's ever been brought on a project because he was Filipino. So that is the connection between the Golden Age.
Fantastic. Well, since you mentioned Disney, Alex Nino was involved in the animation of Mulan, Treasure Planet.
Yeah, to this day, there's a lot of like animators, not just at Disney, but all throughout, there's a whole like generation who've all come up thanks to the comiqueros of the Golden Age. Because they were hiring Filipinos. They would hire Filipinos because they could train them. And then they became their mentors, basically. Nepo baby, but not. Yes.
Yeah, we have so much talent, and we get hired by the ones who have the big
They
producers.
have to make a living, no?
Yeah, no, but the point is that I think you have an independence where your content can still come from our point of view. The moment Disney or whoever takes over a story, I think there's always that unconscious power play that America is, or how people gravitate to Hollywood or to New York. Before you get there, as a screenwriter or as a director, and that comes out in the kinds of stories that we have. So I think I can see a very strong role. I'm sure that comics is going to have a very strong comeback. But like you said earlier, your villain is our hero, no? Lapu-Lapu, who the Spanish said was the bad guy, Salvaje, is actually our hero. And when we reinterpret history, or no, not reinterpret, but just say we're telling our side, the Islander side, and through visuals, you'll have a very strong impact on our youth, who will actually start to say, hey, ang galing natin, ang galing ng ating point of view, and we don't have to believe the stories, whether it's Marvel stories or whether it's Pigafetta's version of the circumnavigation. So I think, sige, just keep topsy-turvying those stories from our point of view. I think that's a good
You
power.
heard it from him.
Thank you, sir. We shall.
I think we have, if there anyone else? No other questions? So I think we can wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for spending this afternoon with us. Thank you to Jay and Budjette for such great presentations.